Hey, I'm Miranda, and you're listening to or watching Unravelling Matters.
But that makes me want to ask you, what is a better approach to teaching children about race and racism?
So I think we need to speak about parents. So before we can have a conversation with the children, the parents need to have a healthy framework to work from. I think in general, parents need to learn to lean into those discussions of ethnicity. And due to non-persons of color being taught to ignore color, they lose the ability to fully appreciate the contributions made by persons of color in American society. I've just broken down a little 3-step process for this. The first is acknowledging that those differences exist in the first place. So color blindness is the opposite of that. If color blindness is ignoring, we need to lean into.
Yes.
So 1, just acknowledge. 2, seek out ways to educate yourself on other people groups' histories. And within an American context, that's learning the history of African Americans, of Japanese Americans, Mexican Americans, Native Americans, and all the other people groups who live here. Because this has got to be one of the most diverse countries in the world. And we have to be open to exploring those things. And the last is finding the beauty in those differences. And so once you acknowledge, once you learn about it, then it's what are the beautiful things and contributions that we see in those differences? And what do I want to highlight for my kids with these?
That is extremely helpful. I never thought about that, saying not just teaching children to recognize and acknowledge all the different ethnicities and all the different cultures, but to recognize the beauty that's in them and to value the differences in them. That's something new for me to think about.
I've heard this said before, I didn't make this up, that the opposite of love is not hate, but fear. The damage that we see in society is rooted out of fear. And so what are we doing? Or what are folks doing? Calling the police on folks. Why? It's fear. It's fear. If this person doesn't belong, what are they going to do? If somebody only has a framework of Black and brown peoples being dangerous, and then you're not used to seeing them, and all of a sudden you see them, oh, now you're dangerous because that's the box that has been created. I need police to intervene in this. And I truly believe that's 90% of the problem that we have right now is because they don't have healthy boxes and they're scared. Now we weaponize the police. I think that's the natural outpouring of that.
So parents need to get their minds right, because if they don't get their minds right, they can't get their children's minds right.
Like Jane Elliott's quote, like, race is not the problem. Our ignorance about race is the problem. And that's how you can address this issue. Like, we can no longer just be ignorant. We have to actually explore the experience of each people group, of each race. And one easy way to do that, working with adolescents and kids, they are curious beings. And I like what you said, Elena, like, lean into the curiosity. That's one easy way. I have a map in my office of all the places I've traveled from. And I put pins in it so they can see, and they'll stand and look at my wall, and then they start asking questions. And then I just explore with them. I give them books from all over the globe, not just here, from all over. And they soak it up. The more you talk about it, the more they're willing to, like, be in conversation with you. Whether it's a white kid, Black kid, that curiosity is there, wanting to know and find out who they are and who the people are around them. So I think not being scared of the topic and really just, all right, what are your thoughts? Tell me.
What are your thoughts about teaching What are your thoughts about teaching small children, Catherine?
I think that Elena and Arisa summed a lot of this up really well. The critical period where we have to really capitalize on all of this curiosity and this exploration is really in these kind of early childhood years. That's when all of these beliefs are going to be forming most rapidly, where we're going to be able to have the most influence about how those boxes get built. It's not that we can't change them later, it's just that it takes a lot more tools and construction equipment to do it. So being able to kind of pour into those boxes with the idea that there are things that should go in those boxes and there are things that also shouldn't go in those boxes. So thinking about, yes, we need a box where there are white people, there are brown people, there are all different types of brown people, but what we don't need in those boxes are those fear messages. Oh, well, because people are brown, we should be afraid of them. Or because people talk with a different language than us or with a different accent, it means that they're not as smart as us. So it's not only that exposure, but also how you're shaping that exposure in a way that's going to be helpful to your child's learning. So even on an environmental level, thinking about as an adult, who are your friends? Is the playground that you're going to only filled with other children that look just like you?
But then I have a question about that. Sorry for cutting across you, but then I have a question. I wanted to circle back.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned exposing your children to different races and so forth and so on. I hate the word races, different ethnicities and cultures.
Mm-hmm.
But for some people, that's not practical.
Right.
Somebody might live in South Dakota where there just aren't other people to expose them to.
Right.
So the question is, how do you guide their learning and understanding when you don't have other ethnicities as a resource?
Yep, you're right. Absolutely. And that is definitely a huge factor. But I think that there are a lot of ways that we can, with all of the technology we have today, we can literally bring the world into our living room. You can go visit a museum in France from your couch through the toys that you have around them. Do you have black and white baby dolls for your child to play with? Are you trying to do things like try different foods?
I like to dip in because it's something I think about a lot. You were saying earlier to be purposeful about teaching small children these kinds of things, but I'd like to caution that there's a difference between being purposeful and almost hyping it up too much, because then it makes minorities come across as fragile. So instead of going, today, children, we're going to learn about Black people because it's really important, as opposed to it's normal for your child, if they are not a Black person, to have a Black baby doll or Indian baby doll or whatever, for it to be such a normal, natural part of your household.
Right.
Those messages can come in subtly.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think too, just keeping in mind that children take cues from the people who take care of them about how to react to the world. It's not going to be helpful if we have all different colors of baby dolls in the house, and we do this kind of overhyped value of like, well, today we're just going to play with the brown baby dolls, and that's what we're going to do. But thinking about the subtle messaging too, if you have all these different colors of baby dolls, but when you sit down to play with your child, you only ever play with the white one, as potentially a white parent, what message does that kind of send to your child? If we have these kind of seemingly subtle reactions to, maybe we turn our body in a different way, or the tone of our voice changes, those little messages that come over and over are also teaching our children how to react when they encounter those different situations. So they might not know the why of why they're reacting that way, but over time, that's how they're going to learn how to react to new and novel situations, because that's what they've seen their parents do time and time again.
I hadn't thought about that either. How are you role modeling your interactions with different ethnic and minority groups?
I think a lot of time you can go with the natural flow of one's experience, honestly.
Right.
Because they'll have different incidents, like if you've ever had a little kid point at somebody who's in a wheelchair or has a disability, like that's a prime opportunity to like talk about that. What does that mean? And kids have those experiences through life. You have to be aware of your own biases, of course, and how you view the world. But in those moments, that's an amazing teaching moment. Or with my youth, the news, something happens in the news and they're like, oh, I want to know about that. I'm like, let's talk. What happened with George Floyd? What was that about? Why are people mad about this looting thing? And like, I try and find other videos, other perspectives across the globe and show them those. And then we just sit and have a conversation about it. And I try and bring it back to their own emotional experiences. Have you ever been very, very mad because someone wouldn't hear you? You felt unheard. Then what happened? And they're like, I got frustrated and I started like throwing things around. I'm like, really? How come? So just putting it into a context that they can kind of understand. They've had the same emotional experiences. And they're like, well, that makes sense. It just leads to more questions and more curiosity. So I think you can go with the natural flow of what's happening in the world around us.
And I think keeping in mind too, as you were talking about just kind of developmentally where a child is at, it doesn't mean that, a child's ever too young to have these conversations. It's just a matter of how do we have them. So for example, a 5 to 7 year old is really in that kind of developmental phase of what's fair and what's not fair. So that's a great opportunity, because those ideas are going to come up several times a day. So to be able to use that lens of what's fair and what's not fair to talk about the protests or what they're potentially seeing on the news, it's probably not great to let them just watch a 15-minute news clip of, everything being broken and smashed and blown up. But you can find clips that are just going to give them an idea of what's going on without just completely terrifying them, because that's not going to be helpful either. And we want to help educate and inform them in a way that's honest and that's straightforward, with a message of kind of hope and protection in that too, because we also don't want to expose them and leave them hanging like, well, it's going to be completely terrible and you want to just run, be scared from every single person. But, we want to talk about, we're all here for each other. We have a lot of people that love and care about us.
My takeaway from all of you, it sounds like, is 1, you need to be self-aware. 2, you need to teach your children to be self-aware. And 3, you need to guide your children as they learn about race and ethnicities and other cultures, because it's the combination of the self-awareness and the mindful teaching that will help your children. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Because I'm learning and I'm growing.
Yes, we're talking about parenting right now, but how you can become a representation, not just to your own kids, but to other people's kids, to your other adult friends, and it spreads. This week at work, there is this dude. He had on a sweatshirt. Y'all know the picture of the Olympics where the 2 gentlemen are having the Black Power fist up?
Yeah.
Had that on a shirt, sweatshirt. Next day, Harriet Tubman on the shirt. Next day, Kente print. I said, this white dude is down for the cause.
Like, sir, you got the whole closet.
Right? It's really good. But it was exciting to see that just, it's not just for Black people, it's allies as well. And that is such a beautiful thing.
I agree.
Thank you so much for watching. I sincerely hope that you found this conversation helpful. And if you did, please consider liking and subscribing so that you can hear the next part in this series where we discuss the different life strategies we teach minority and non-minority children, and we go in depth about respectability politics.